Welcome to me and Ben's circulatory system project. Today, with the aid of Fredric, our vessel person that we have drawn, we will be teaching you about the circulatory system and how it all works.
And now, we are going to be talking about the differences between deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood. First off, oxygenated blood is rich in oxygen. It forms in the lungs, as we can see right here, after oxygen diffuses in the blood during external respiration. This blood is bright red and is pumped from the left side of the heart through the arteries to body tissues, where it delivers oxygen for cellular respiration.
Now, deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood has already delivered its oxygen to body cells and has picked up carbon dioxide as a waste product. It is darker red, but normally on diagrams it's shown as blue, as you can see here. This blood returns to the right side of the heart through the veins and is pumped to the lungs to release carbon dioxide and pick up more oxygen. Just right here, you can see that on our diagram.
And now we're going to be discussing the brain circuit. First off, deoxygenated blood passes through the posterior vena cava right here and also through the anterior vena cava. Together, at the same time, they are going into the right atrium, as we can see right here. After that, it passes through the right atrioventricular valve, also known as the tricuspid. After entering through the valve, they head into the right ventricle, which after that, they travel up to the pulmonary semilunar valves, and then they go out the pulmonary arteries into the lungs.
Now that the blood has found itself in the lungs, it will now become oxygenated. This oxygenated blood passes through the pulmonary veins, finding itself in the left atrium. Once the blood is there, it'll go down into the left ventricle through the left AV valve, the atrioventricular valve, also known as the bicuspid. Now that it is in the left ventricle, it'll go back up again through the aortic semilunar valve, passing into the aorta and coming up here. Once the oxygenated blood finds itself up here, it can either pass through the subclavians and also up through the carotid arteries to get into the brain. Your brain does need lots of oxygen. Your brain is very rich in capillary beds. So once this oxygenated blood diffuses into your tissues, so you can think, it'll then proceed to be deoxygenated. This deoxygenated blood comes back down through the blue here and comes down through the jugular veins, which are in your neck. This will then join again into your subclavian and back into the anterior vena cava, back into the heart to repeat the process. Once again, deoxygenated blood will enter through the posterior and anterior vena cava in through the top of the heart into the right atrium. The deoxygenated blood in the right atrium will then pass through the right atrioventricular valve into the right ventricle, as you can see here. That blood will then be pumped up as the muscle contracts through the pulmonary semilunar valve in and out into the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. Once the blood, as we talked about, is deoxygenated and in the lungs, they will then become oxygenated through diffusion. This blood will then enter back into the heart through the pulmonary veins, joining on either side to then enter the left atrium. The left atrium, all the blood in the left atrium will then be squeezed down through the left atrioventricular valve. All this blood will then find itself right here in the left ventricle. The oxygenated blood that is now in the left ventricle will then go back up through the aortic semilunar valve, finding itself passing down the descending aorta.
While the oxygenated blood is passing through the descending aorta, some of the blood will go through the renal artery that leads to the kidney. While the blood's in the kidney, as we know, they're capillary beds. So the oxygenated blood diffuses into the tissue and then eventually comes out deoxygenated. But before, it needs to pass through the renal vein, up through the posterior vena cava, into the heart to be recirculated.
Now we're going to discuss respiration. First off, there's external respiration. External respiration occurs in the lungs. It's the exchange of gas between the air in the alveoli and the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. All of this happens right here in the capillary beds in the lungs. Oxygen will enter the blood and carbon dioxide will leave the blood so it can be exhaled through the mouth and the nasopharyngeal opening.
Now I'm going to be talking about internal respiration. Internal respiration occurs in the body tissues everywhere, such as the brain and the kidneys. Oxygen moves from the blood into cells so they can produce energy, while carbon dioxide moves from the cells into the blood as a waste product. So in conclusion, blood is basically on a non-stop road trip around your body. It leaves the heart, picks up oxygen in the lungs, drops that oxygen off in places like the brain, the kidneys, collects carbon dioxide, and then heads right back to the heart to do it all over again. There are no breaks, no weekends off, and definitely no traffic lights.
The heart acts like a very determined pump. The blood vessels are the highways, and the red and blue are just switching roles depending on where they've been. Thanks to this system, our cells stay alive, our organs keep working, and we don't pass out every 5 seconds. Thank you for listening to our presentation about the circulatory system. We hoped you learned a thing or two and liked our presentation.
I know I sure did. Coming into this unit, I had no idea what happened inside of our bodies and about the circulatory system.
You learn something new every day.
Exactly. And thank you to Miss McKilkin for teaching us this very interesting unit. Now I know it all.
Now that we're in the lungs, the oxygenated blood, it's deoxygenated.
While the oxygenated blood is in the... what the